So good morning world. Yes, this is day number 3 of Superbooth 2021 in Berlin. Yes, I know I'm wearing some first signs of fatigue, but hey, the weather is better than expected and we stand until the last moment, until the end. So, let's go!
What can I say? It's one of the most successful synthesizer projects of the last decade.
Yeah, well, we are now we hit now almost the 100th. That means the 95th Schmidt serial number 95 has been delivered. This is a success story, but there are not so many units we sold. But compared to the price,
yeah, of course.
It's a success story, and we never believed in this. At the first time, we in 2011 we introduced this instrument at Music Messe. In 2012 we were at NAMM, and then a very famous composer, movie composer, bought this, and this was the starting point for us to say, okay, let's make a first batch with 25 or 27 units. And it took about 3 years to sell them, so it was a big step for us to say, okay, let's do another one. And financing everything, and this second batch was sold in a year. So then it was clear to us to build a third one, and now a fourth one. But I told in the camera 2 times we will stop buying a building because I'm not sure if this makes sense, and it made sense because the orders are coming in, they're still coming in. And why not building this fantastic machine? We have some little issues with parts. We solved this for the 5th batch. We are planning now. This will be delayed due to the chip crisis. Everyone knows this.
Yes, I wanted to ask you: are you feeling or are you seeing problems because of the chip crisis?
Absolutely.
Or delivering parts generally.
Generally, and. Some delivery times went from 12 weeks to 52 weeks, and everyone here in the room at Superbooth have the same problem. So, but we keep on building. We solved the problem with some obsolete parts. That was really a big worries about the obsolete parts because this technique is from Stefan started to create it in 2004, 2005. And Stefan Schmidt.
Stefan Schmidt, sorry. Yes.
And also the processors, it's an analog synthesizer, but for communication between the components you need some microprocessors. These are 80 megas, and these are very old-fashioned 80 megas, and they are still available, but it makes no sense to make a complete reconstruction of this machine. So
that would be a complete redesign, and that would cost too much.
Also, we built it 99% in THT parts, put in solder on the bottom, and these parts are harder to get and are more expensive than in former times because the industry demands for SMD components. But we do it the old school way. But
the old school way makes a difference, yes?
Makes the difference. Well, we have a discussion. Recently I had a discussion with another synthesizer manufacturer between sound quality on SMD components and on THT components. I'm not sure there's a big discussion. I think
yes, it always is because of analog better than digital and everything. Yes, I know it's complicated, but sometimes it's also a question of taste.
Yeah, but there are really some issues I learned. If you make your circuits too narrow, you have crosstalk. And I saw this on many popular synthesizers. If you hear closely, you hear some oscillators singing in the muted sound. That's not here the case because Stefan Schmidt did everything against crosstalk.
But anyway, you developed the units and the technology, and you have put some updates into it.
Yeah, because there's a firmware. Some things were urgently necessary, like there's a repeat button in the VCA section, and it took a few years to activate this function. And we never, by the way, we never wanted a sequencer or an arpeggiator, but a customer developed it on an Arduino platform. It's a little PCB platform, and we integrated it now. It's here. There's a sequencer.
So it's a channel sequencer, or is it?
It's a step sequencer, and it's a pure live sequencer. When you shut it down, all is gone, because it just lives in the keyboard processor here. For example, oscillator 4 with its waveforms, when you change the waveform, you have to retune it every time. Now we solved this. With some little things that annoyed a little bit, and now it's solved.
Yeah, you fixed some problems.
Some problems. So also because our customers demanded something.
So you can update every of your sold units, and you are up to date.
Absolutely, by MIDI.
So no hardware changes or...
No.
So yes, we will buy a fifth batch, and
we will build a fifth batch somewhere in 2022.
Yeah.
And this will be a big batch with 50 units. But then I say the third time in the company.
15 or 15?
15. This might be the third time I say it now. Might be the last batch we build.
Okay. Never say never again.
Yeah.
But 50 is a lot.
Yeah, it is.
So are you more in let's say studios or private customers?
In the last time, more professionals buy the synthesizer. In the first time, there were many people who wanted to fill their dreams because they had the money. But in the last years, you find this in many studios, also some very well-known rock bands, and so bought this. And you can hear it even in German Tatorte, because some famous German TV composers have some Schmidt. It's a chameleon. Ty Unwin is a very good British composer for BBC, and so it solves so many problems in the studio because it's a chameleon. It can be everything. It can be an FM synth, it can be an Oberheim synth, it can be even a mellotron. It's capable of creating all the sounds you need.
So to understand the oscillators, they are not only providing the analog waveforms, they provide more.
Yeah, but all waveforms are analog. Well, there are the classic waveforms like the square wave and the sawtooth, but we have here this oscillator for told you.
Okay. You can also use it as LFO, or is it just audible oscillator?
Yes, it's an audible oscillator, but you have so many LFOs where you need it. There's no modulation matrix. You have everywhere LFOs in envelopes, and on the places you need them. And there's an LFO, for example, to morph between the waveforms. And these are not sampled waveforms, they are generated by the square waves and the ring modulators.
I'm asking this because I might be watching some guys which have never had the chance to play it before, and would like to know what this guy here can.
Yeah.
So where the possibilities are. In the filter modules, what can you say about that?
7 filters. There's 2 Moog style multimode filter and 2 Oberheim double filters. You can switch them between high pass, band pass, and so on. And then there's an additional afterburner filter, which is connected directly to the oscillators, which you can add some. You can enhance some frequency you took away here. It's some kind of afterburner. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
And how do you access modulation passes? Is there somehow software metrics you can access?
No, there is some modulation modules. They are everywhere where you need them, modulators, LFOs and envelopes.
by pressing the switch.
Look here, PWM LFOs. There's LFOs here. There's LFOs here. Here are LFOs. And envelopes, LFOs, envelopes.
Every module has. You have no center LFO and say go here and go there.
No modulation matrix. You have many modulators where you need them.
This is a very complex guy.
Yeah, and if you see other synthesizers, they use the so-called slop mode to emulate the behavior of the old memory mode or overhand, the drifting of the oscillators. We don't need it because there are so many LFOs, you can do it by yourself, programming your sound. Also, we have no effects, but the sound engine is capable of doing like phasing, or with a trigger delay you can do delays, or with this special parameter here in the last PCB you can do some reverb-like stuff. So no effects module, the engine is capable of doing effects as well.
And how many presets can you store?
You have 8 times 180 in the single mode, 8 times 64 in multi-mode, because it's 8 times capable of 8 times multi-mode.
So this guy has no effect units, you do everything with it in the studio, and from the output side, every voice has a
Yeah, we have a normal stereo output and 8 single outputs for every voice.
For the guys who have no place on the mixing desk.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, thank you, Axel, for this introduction. We are talking about the wood that you used.
Yeah.
Last time,
This one you see, it's mahogany, mahogany, I think it's in English.
Yeah.
And now this material is out. We have only for 2 or 3 units.
Yeah.
This one, I'm not sad about it because it's not really sustainable. It's precious wood from Africa. So this is an example for Bavarian, it's Spanish. This is Spanish light oak. This could be one solution for the next Schmidt synthesizers. We don't know.
But you can choose if you want to.
We're thinking about it. It's a problem. You need. If you go to a carpenter and she says, okay, I have to program my CNC machines and I will do 50 cases, so we don't know what the customers want. So I think it will be something like this out of oak.
But it will definitely be wood, and you cannot.
Definitely.
You cannot say I want a black one or a blue one or something.
No. The basic structure of the casing is wood. Not other synthesizers have a steel or aluminium case and then wooden parts.
Yeah.
But that's the reason why it's so really heavy.
Yes.
It's very heavy because of the wood.
Axel, thank you very much for the interview.
Yes. Thank you.
We see us just today and tomorrow, and then Superbooth is over again, and we hope for next year.
Absolutely.
And then you will tell me, yes, you have 50 more units in the...
No, we have to build.
Yeah, how long will it...
We don't know, it's the chip crisis. I think we will sell this series with a new wood until 2023, then we are sold out, and then let's see when we can start building the new ones. Depends on the manufacturers and on the shipping companies.
So yeah, enough time to save your money.
Absolutely.
To be prepared if it goes...
When we had to raise the prices the last year, this one is 21,900 euros, and this is 1,000 euros more because we have problems with the light color. We have to throw some panels away because you see every little mistake here on the color. That's the reason why they are a little bit more expensive.
Yes, it's the time everything goes...
And one big change, these knobs are gray now. This is the old version, and now, because it's easier to work with it, because the most important function like cutoff or so have now gray knobs.
Okay.
This was the cheapest enhancement we ever made.
Wow. Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Superbooth 21 in Berlin. Now our topic is Berliner Schule, because this is a very German thing. We switched to German language now. So, ich habe hier Bernd Kistenmacher, ein Vertreter der Berliner Schule, der neuen Berliner Schule und Kenner der Berliner Schule.
Ja, freue mich sehr, dass ich hier sein darf.
Willkommen. Was ist das Besondere an der Berliner Schule?
Das Besondere, muss man sagen, ist, dass es schon sehr lange vorbei ist, wenn man ganz ehrlich ist. Ja. Es gibt natürlich, alles im Leben verläuft in Wellen und alles kommt immer wieder und nichts geht wirklich verloren, aber wenn man ganz ehrlich ist, ist so im Jahr 1989 so die große Hochzeit der Berliner Schule zu Ende gewesen. 1990, wo die Grenzen gefallen sind, wo Berlin eine Stadt war, begann ja hier was Neues. Und damit war auch das Alte erstmal erledigt.
Ja, aber es wird ja nach wie vor gelebt. Wenn ich das sehe, wir haben es eben im Video gesehen, eine Live-Performance von dir in einem Planetarium. Ich glaube, meistens hört man tatsächlich diese Art von elektronischen Musik in Planetarien zum Live.
Ja, genau. Also natürlich inhaltlich, wir reden da natürlich auch über eine bestimmte Stilistik, also über eine Mischung eben aus sehr vielen üppigen Flächen, experimentellen Sounds, dann dagegen geworfen Sequenzen, lange Soli, so eine Dinge brauchen eine Weile, bis sie sich entwickeln, und dann ist so ein Stück dann auch schon mal 45 Minuten lang, kann durchaus sein, auch mal eine Stunde, und da ist man natürlich in einem Planetarium sehr gut aufgehoben, weil man sich zurücklehnen kann, die Augen schließen kann, in die Sterne gucken kann und einfach mal ein bisschen abfliegen aus dem normalen, langweiligen Leben.
Also
dann passt es gut.
Ja, also diese Berliner Schule elektronische Musik, ist das eigentlich dann so eine Stargazer-Musik?
Naja, sie ist so ein bisschen, hat dieses Klischee natürlich. Also ich sag mal so, ich kann nur über mich reden und nicht über die anderen, die sowas auch machen. Für mich war eigentlich die Motivation, so eine Musik zu machen, Anfang der 80er Jahre, eigentlich die, dass zu dieser Zeit meine Heroes damals, also Klaus Schulze, Bernd, all die Leute, die auch in Berlin ja mit der Elektronik eigentlich angefangen haben, zu diesem Zeitpunkt anfingen, ihren Stil zu ändern und eigentlich diese Musik, die ich geliebt habe, gar nicht mehr weitergemacht haben, ja, weitergeführt haben. Steht ja auch jedem Künstler zu, seinen Geschmack mal zu ändern und seinen Stil. Ich war damit nicht glücklich und war immer der Meinung, da gibt es schon noch ein paar Geschichten, die man zum Thema Berliner Schule erzählen kann. Und das war genau der Moment, wo ich dann angefangen habe, selbst Musik zu machen. Und habe mich da also sozusagen in der zweiten Generation sozusagen da nach vorne gearbeitet. Und insofern war mir aber nicht wichtig, da so eine Schublade wieder zu bedienen, so Stargazer-Musik, ja, klar, Wolkenschiebermusik hieß ja in den 70er Jahren, irgendeine Bezeichnung gab es ja immer dafür. Es ist natürlich auch der Tatsache geschuldet, dass man diese Musik schwer einordnen kann. Ja, Four on the Floor ist einfacher, das ist Beat, da kann man tanzen zu, da kann man auch mitgehen. Bei der Musik ist es ein bisschen anders.
Da gibt es natürlich auch viele Styles. Aber du bist ja jetzt, wie du gerade erzählt hast, lange schon dabei, ja, und entwickelst die Musik weiter und hast bei den Heroes angefangen. Das ist mir auch passiert. Ich halte mal das hier unter die Nase und du wirst es wahrscheinlich kennen.
Ja klar, das ist so ein Notenblatt vom guten alten Klaus Schulze. Bayreuth Return, ja, Wahnfried, die Komposition, genau, das war ein Stück auf seiner Platte Teilwind. Und ich glaube, damit hat er sich sogar bei der GEMA als ernster Komponist eintragen lassen. Und musste eben
Partitur.
Ja, er musste eben nachweisen, dass er in der Lage ist, eine Partitur zu schreiben.
Als 11-Jähriger entdeckt, Freunde diese Platte da, und ich habe mir die angehört und immer diese Partitur mir angeguckt und dachte, Wahnsinn. So. Ich hatte natürlich keine Ahnung von elektronischer Musik, aber irgendwie habe ich das total berührt.
Die von der GEMA wahrscheinlich auch nicht, aber das sah eben sehr überzeugend aus.
Ja, halt es mal die Cover, das ist total cool.
Ja, es ist in dem Plattencover drin von der Timeline.
Genau, ja, genau. Timeline. Ja, das war die erste, ich glaube meine einzige Platte tatsächlich, wenn es um Berliner Schule geht.
Okay.
Aber es war
ein guter Einstieg.
Ja, also hoher Einstieg.
Why is so funny? And we're here on the stage with another two Berliners and with Gereth Jones, who's our guest now. And this is the talk with Gereth Jones, where we would like to cover several themes where we've just been talking about. And I, first of all, welcome a lot Gereth Jones and Gerhard Mayrhofer and Gert Jalass, all with G. It's genius. Thanks for coming, everybody. So,
thank you, Andreas.
I would like to find a bow from here to there about analog and digital, because I was updated by my wife, who found something on the net saying that you produced the album for Jan Tiersen that was released currently, and Jan Tiersen was playing the day before yesterday, and he's on the show every day, and you are his producer with this album Kerber. And I would like to have a bit more knowledge about what do you mean with you produced it analog?
Well, first of all, it's very much a co-production. Jan's a great producer himself.
Okay, I'm sorry.
And that's okay. And he's a great musician and electronic music wizard as well, as you might have seen on Wednesday night. So, first of all, it's not analog, the last album.
Okay.
So there is an analog element to our work, of course. So I'll go back an album to the album before, which is like a triple album called Portrait, which is a history, I think, pretty much a random history through Jan's back catalogue, which he toured with a band before we went in the studio to his studio. He's got a wonderful studio on the island of Wesson. And we toured, the band toured the album before we recorded it. Jan is a big analog nut. He's a digital freak as well, actually, but he's a huge analog fan, and that's reflected in the studio that he built, which has a big analog console, many analog consoles, and lots of tape recorders. So, for the album Portrait, which is the analog record, Jan's vision was to make it pure analog from sound source to vinyl. So it was kind of a challenge that he threw out to us all. And obviously I've got a long history of working pre-digital in the 70s and 80s and into the 90s. And so I was happy to go on this journey with him. What do we like about it? First of all, I should quote the genius Mr. Brian Eno, who said, anyone who romanticizes working with tape has never actually done it. Because it's a pain in the ass working with tape. It's a beautiful thing, but it's not an easy route. But one of the good things about it is that obviously one of the good things about analog, in my opinion, altogether, is that you have to commit with analog in a way that, because digital is storable and savable and endlessly editable, it's possible to avoid making decisions. And with analog, in my work as a producer and as a musician, I'm forced to make commitments all the time, which I like. Because if I'm not forced to make a commitment, then I just don't do anything. I just piss about endlessly. So that's the general thing I love about analog, is it forces you to commit. Whether the wonderful, joyful experience I had with Daniel with our Sunroof record that you mentioned,
yes,
is analog modular improvisations. And for sure, that record wouldn't have happened if we hadn't done it with analog modulars, recorded straight to stereo or sometimes recorded to 4-track and then finished, because we would have spent 10 years editing it and then we would have got really bored and it never would have come out, you know. So the fact that we were forced to commit to performances, and this is really big for me, it's really big, because it's like a limitation that forces me to complete stuff. And I mean, it's not just me, many people report this experience. If you limit yourself, you can get stuff done. So one of the reasons it was possible to make Jan's wonderful retrospective vision portrait was because the band were very rehearsed. So we tracked it as a band actually, old school, which was all part of the process. And because it was on tape, we had to be, or the band actually had to be very efficient. And there's a big thing, there's a bit of magic happens with tape, I feel, because it's not easy to fix problems. Musicians raise their game sometimes when they're playing to tape. Every band wants to come in and see the tape go round and round and hear something really good come out the speakers. And that in itself is an incredible psychological aid, I feel, to good performance. So that certainly worked, and we had a number of occasions on that record where one member of the band, never Jan actually, but one member of the band would want to fix something, and we'd kind of just laugh at them and say, come on man, that doesn't matter, it's on tape, it's not worth the hassle, just leave it. And none of those problems ever mattered afterwards, you know, so that was super interesting. And of course the other great thing is it's track limited. We only had 23 tracks, so that is a massive time saver as well. Time code. No click actually. It was live, everything was played without click actually, but yeah, that would have been 22 if we had click and time code, but it was just time code for a mixed computer, saved to the mixed computer. So that's great as well. I heard a great photographer talk about his work with students, and some of the students, when he's doing a 2-week or 3-week workshop, some work digital and some work analog. And one thing that had struck him as a mentor was that the analog students were always finished first, because right up to the final moment, the digital students would still have 5,000 pictures to choose from. And of course the analog people had committed, because film's not unlimited, they'd committed to something earlier in the process. And he didn't say that digital work was worse, but for sure the analog people finished first. And I do feel Jan's record, the triple album, right, when I started I thought it was a single album, so it turned into a triple album, so this was a bit of a surprise. But I don't think if we'd done it on digital, on a DAW, I don't think we could have done it in the time available. I think that was a big time, funnily enough, although there's extra pressure, it was a big time saver because we didn't have so many choices. We couldn't stack takes up endlessly and edit between them. We just, the whole band every time just went for a performance of the song, which worked because it was like an old school project, because the band had toured the album before. That almost never happens in my experience these days. I think it happened in the 50s and the 60s a lot, when many albums were recorded after the band had been on the road for a year, so they could play it. But a lot of work now seems to happen, the songs are kind of half written, then people go into a digital world and build a record. And that's great, but it's not so great if time is limited and you want to produce great performances on analog tape. So there we go. So that was it, really well rehearsed band, lots of commitment, not too many reels of tape available. We didn't have millions of euros for tape costs.
Sure.
Great material, really well rehearsed, meant that we were able to track the album in a really exciting and creative way. And then we carried on, we mixed it analog on a wonderful solid state board that Jan bought, and of course we mixed to tape, and that's another issue that I could touch on if anyone's interested afterwards, but we mixed to tape, and then we really wanted to cut the vinyl directly from the analog tape, which sounds simple, except that most of the modern lathes have the actual audio that goes to the cutter head is delayed through a digital line, because that's how the cutting computer works. It knows there's something loud coming because it looks at the tape and then delays the cutter head by half a revolution. But we didn't want to do that. We wanted to stay analog all the way, so we went to our friend Alex Wharton at Abbey Road, who's a wonderful soul and a great mastering engineer, great vinyl cutter, and he dug out one of the old tape recorders, which has a head for the audio and a head for the cutting lathe, so the tape goes round like a huge path. So it's all a bit nerdy. I don't know if anyone could tell afterwards, actually. For us, it was a wonderful journey, and we went all the way from the microphone to the vinyl along an analog road, and it was a great experience. And that was the previous record. So the new record, Quebec, which is a wonderful follow-up to the Oyster record, kind of based around piano. Jan said a great thing about it recently in interviews that I saw. He didn't say it at the time. He said the piano was an excuse to have something to hang the electronics on, which I thought was really, really cool. And we met up, and obviously Jan was super well prepared, and he could play all the piano. Each piece is based around a piano solo, which are wonderful in themselves. But we had a conversation about how we were going to make the record, because there was a possibility that we might go to tape. Record company were freaking out a little bit because of tape costs. That was one thing. I was freaking out a little bit because I was really excited about Jan's modular vision, and I wanted to be able to get very creative. I feel personally very creative with Logic Audio. So I was very keen to work with Logic Audio, and also in the studio are some wonderful high-end analog to digital converters. So there was no sense that we were sacrificing sound by going digital. So for that record, very quickly we decided. I knew Jan wanted to get going, and very quickly we share an aesthetic actually, which is one of the reasons we've been able to work together over a number of albums so creatively, I feel. Very quickly it was clear that we were going to do this thing in a DAW. But of course it's hybrid. We didn't mix in the box. And we tracked through wonderful analog gear. And I think most people who can afford it work hybrid, because why not? It's a complete joy. And so it all goes in the box, the Logic Audio box. We mix it on the SSL console. We print it to tape and to digital, of course, as everyone does. And afterwards, we both listened separately to the mixes and chose different mixes. Sometimes we chose the digital, and sometimes we chose the analog, because it was subtle. And it was very interesting because we did it independently, and we both agreed. We both picked the same set, 4 and 3, I think it was, or something. I don't know, 4 each. So that is enough for me for a minute.
That was a very nice insight in understanding your life and what you are doing. Thank you very much. And I know what Daniel has in his, Daniel Miller, this is not about Jan Thiersen, in his thing, and this is the analog look of playing around, but there's also digital modules in. And in the end, if you talk about it was quite analog, apart from that very special and very analog way, it's always, there's a difference in between real analog or analog because you can touch things and you play on things, and you record to tape or you record to vinyl directly, but still there's always digital components. So in the end, do you think we have to mind about, is there digital components in, or in the end, yeah, they are existing and they are part of it?
I totally, they're part of it. I mean, that's digital, right? That camera. Are we streaming from film?
It's the same over there. And I also thought, leading over to our other guest, he's a programmer, from what I know, in his original life, and he started with making modular components in the size of the Moog thing, and the Moog thing is known for being the analog Blaupause, the early stuff from, I don't know when, we'll come to that later, and then he said I was unhappy with the sequences in the Moog system because he's also experiencing the performance of patching and playing longer than we do, because he was already with the Moog things, he was one of the big collector of Moog things when everybody was throwing them out of their collections. He was one of them. I take it. And so he had a huge Moog wall, like nowadays only Hans Zimmer is well known for such. And then he said, I needed a sequencer that is better, and then he designed a digital sequencer, you know, but everybody is seeing it, all the clients and the users are definitely seeing it, oh, analog system, wunderbar, and then there's plenty of Moog modular instead of Moog modular, this is all digital stuff, I don't know, but...
I think it's like Gereth said, that some of our modules, they look extremely analog because it's a haptical thing, you work with it, so you have a knob and you turn it, which is completely different than pushing a button on pushing a button on something. But obviously the sequences behind these days, I myself, so as a designer, didn't want to bother with the complexity of analog things. So it's okay, we put in a computer in there, but it behaves more or less like the old analog stuff.
But the important thing is the limitation from what you say, and I think it's the same, it's the limitation of having one knob per function.
Yes, I think
and I don't mind what's behind.
I think it's a little bit like what I always say is, you get what you see. So there is no hidden thing, you just have these amount of knobs, you have these amount of switches, and yeah, that's it, and you have to live with it.
Yes.
And I think creativity comes from that you have a certain restriction and have to work in that restriction, because you have to understand what is going on, and then you will use it, and even at a certain point in time, you think, oops, how did I do that?
Does your sequencer store sequences?
No.
Brilliant.
Well done.
No,
like you could stay.
I think it's what the sequencer does, because I'm more in this type of Berlin School sequencer type of thing. What I've learned over time is that some musicians like scales. So my sequencer, you can have it quantized in terms of
pitch.
Yeah,
of course, yeah.
But if you want to control a filter, where it's much more important to have subtle changes, then you don't need the quantizer. Yeah. So it's offering both. And the other thing is that our sequences, you know the sequences, and they walk 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. When we thought, okay, that's a good idea, but why not walk backwards or what? So there's a lot of chances to even the same sequence, if you have it just 4 notes or 8 notes, if you run it forward, it sounds like something. If you run it backward, it sounds like something. And if you tune it very well, it's really a nice variation you get in there. Yeah. So I think, and all this is more interaction with it than really thinking ages about it, how you want to structure something. You are in front of it and work with it. And I think that's important.
Yeah, so do I. And I think it's super important that, to me, I had a great conversation at Superbooth actually with another genius maker called Urs Heckmann, dear friend, a while ago, on exactly this, about how really the problem with the plug-in synths was that you can store them, and then you can tweak it the next day, and the next day you can tweak it, and 3 weeks later you can... So he made me a special one-off version of Ace that I couldn't save it.
But he didn't took it over to his product?
No, it's clearly not a commercial decision. But
is it just the idea that to know that you are able to save?
Yeah, because
it changes the whole thing.
Yeah, I think so. Because once you can save, you've got a security blanket. You know, and it's old school, isn't it? Like a pianist or a guitarist or a drummer, none of them could save the performance and edit it later. They delivered something, and if it's good, you use it, and if it's shit, you do it again. You know, I kind of like that.
Yeah, that's the way to rehearse. Yeah.
Yeah, you rehearse. Yeah, and you can listen to it the next day, and if it survives the next day and the day after, then great. Personally, with my so, you know, my musical projects, as opposed to my production projects, like Sunroof, the crazy improvisation record with Daniel, or I have a solo project called Electrogenetic, and another project with Nick Hook in Brooklyn called Spiritual Friendship.
Yeah, been here on the Superbooth. On the
we
first.
love you actually for that. Nick wants to send his love to you, Andreas,
yeah.
because you helped us do our very first live performance here at the first.
Yes, in the Funkhaus.
So thank you very much for that from Nick.
Thank you for doing it.
So
let's say hello to Nick.
Hi Nick. And so, and I have another thing called Now South with Chris Bono, and all these projects, for me, my musical output is based on not being able to save stuff. For 30 years or some more in the studio, I had endless folders of unfinished stuff. And it was only when I moved to a new headspace, but then I moved to my personal choice, Eurorack, again inspired by you, Andreas, and your wonderful store. This idea of actually committing to stuff and recording a bass line, and if it was recording an improvisation, and if it was no good, recording another improvisation. It doesn't work for everyone. But for me personally, it's profound. You know, it's really the only way I can get stuff done.
I like that very much. You know. So I'm working with a digital modular. It's inside this Bitwig software.
Okay.
And it's called the Grid. It's a great modular system.
Okay.
And of course, you can store everything.
Yeah.
And yes, my experience is that you have to really take care of not to make versions and versions of patches, because you cannot track that.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm working in digital, like exactly the same. I'm recording an audio file.
Yeah, great. That's for me. That's how it works with the. And I use some. Of course, in my commissioned work as a mixer and a producer, I'm quite happy to use digital wherever it's necessary to do it to get stuff done on time and on budget. But also in my work as a composer and as a musician, then when I use plugins, I record them exactly the same as you're doing. If I build I quite like the soft tube modular setup, and if I create a patch in that and I'm feeling it, I just I track it to an audio file.
Then you delete the patch.
I'm not sure I have the balls to delete the patch. I hide the track and put it in the background somewhere. See, that's the danger with digital. It's very hard. It's because, I delete the patch, but I backed it up last night, of course, on Time Machine. So then it's in the cloud, and it's over there, and it's on my offsite backup. You know, it's very hard to be. Same with the last Now South record we did, and the Spiritual Friendship record. I said, guys, can we try and pretend that Ableton Live is a 16-track? And we kind of stuck to it. And these guys are a lot younger than me, like 40, and they just looked at me like I was a madman. Why would you want to do 16-track? And I said, yeah, so we can get finished, maybe, you know. And it worked. And they loved it afterwards. They loved it. And it's about limitations.
Yeah. I think it's you talked about the price of tapes when you said. I think it's the very same if you look at modulars. So you can have one oscillator or 500 if the amount of money you want to spend.
Yeah.
I think it's much better to just have good ones obviously, but only a few, and start with a few. And there are people that say, okay, they have a lot of money and they have a lot of modulars, and they even said, okay, I have a wall which is 4 sections, and each of the section is a patch I'm working on.
Yeah.
So this is then a little bit like storing your ideas.
It's decadent. It's kind of decadent, no?
Yeah, but it's like
it's just different. I wouldn't criticise it. It's just a different way of working. Some people do.
I would be stupid to criticise it.
No, I think. I think one of the reasons is that, like, if you're in the digital world and like you talked about the UHE stuff, you just can recall it. If you have a complex modular patch, which you like, say I want to use it in 2-3 days, and you remove all the patch cords, you really have to remember a lot to get it back again.
But you learn which is your favorite, because you do it again, and if it's your favorite patch, you don't just take it all out because you search it again and you create something better.
I can't redo anything I do with
modular. But sometimes we try to.
I give up. I can't. I mean, there are great geniuses who can do that, but I can't. I'm more like a naive hobbyist. I just make something, and if I'm lucky, and the machine gives me something back, then that's why I chose the name Electrogenetic for my solo project, because I felt that there was a birth in the electronics in my interaction with modular. But also, I'm sorry, I don't want to make this bigging up Andreas Schneider thing, but I'm going to.
Yeah.
So Andreas had a philosophy which I've started. I believe this is from you, which I've started following more now. Is I build a rack for the particular composition of the particular piece I'm going to do. I don't have a wall of modular, but I have more modules than go in my 104.
Yes.
So now I tend to build it. I think, well, I'm doing this. I'm going to build a case. I'm at the moment. I wrote a record with a young woman, young by my standards anyway, called Emily, where we're going to do some live work. And so I built a modular case exactly for the live work, and I'm really enjoying that. To take us again a limitation and say, well, that's what I need for this. Okay, I'm doing some improvisations with Daniel. That's what I need for that, and I find that fantastic. That I don't get overwhelmed by too many modules. It's a very small brain, obviously.
But I think it's what I like. That's one I like what you said. With the modular, you can tune it as such to what you want to achieve. So you don't have a huge keyboard with 5 million sounds or whatever. So you say, okay, I like this, and I then start working with that. And I think a lot of people, I love collecting stuff too. But you somehow, if you want to work with it, you really have to understand what each module is worth for, or you can do with it, or what it is capable. And then you have to decide. So it doesn't make you have 4 filters. If you only use one of them, then just stick to that one and use it. And I guess for a tapestry on the wall, it's cool to have a large modular with tons of lights and LEDs and whatnot. But for a work, I guess, it's cool for the tapestry. But
but it differs, to be a collector is another function and another job and another performance than to be a producer.
Sure.
And that's you're making music, and we have a high respect against that. And you're really making good music. Thank you very much for doing that.
Thank you, brother. I learned at the very beginning of my so-called career. I worked with a very talented electronic musician called John Fox, and he was hugely experienced compared to me, because I think he'd made 3 albums already, and I hadn't really made a single album as a young engineer. So he was like a great mentor, because he knew at that stage, to me, he was so far ahead. And anyway, he had the idea to make a minimal electronic music record. And he had been in a band called Ultravox, where they'd been in bigger studios with big producers. And so he was art school trained, so he was thinking about the processes all the time. So, and I didn't understand what was going on at the time. His idea was to make a minimal record. So he came to the 8-track studio. The 24-track studios already existed. He came to the 8-track studio, which I happened to be working in, and he came with 1 synthesizer, 1 drum machine, and 1 string machine and a flanger. And surprise, surprise, it turned out to be a minimal record, because he only had 8 tracks, and he only had a tiny collection of synths. And at that, like 10 years later, I look back at that and I understood the vision of limitation, which he'd implemented it. He didn't say, okay, I've got a big budget, I'm going to go into a huge studio with loads of synths and make a minimal record. He said, well, it's a minimal record means minimal toolkit, and it works really well for him. And for me, actually, it was the first record I worked on from beginning to end, so it's a joy.
Yeah, about the reduction, I recently read a nice story about his name is Samuel Shepard. His project name is Floating Points.
Yeah.
And he wanted to start with analog synthesizers. And he found something about Buchla. And he thought maybe it's a good idea to just call them up and to get an advice where to begin. And it came so that he met Don Buchla himself on the phone. He was just there. And he said that Don Buchla took his time and explained all the systems and then gave him the advice. Well, I think it's a good idea if you just begin with the complex oscillator. And then he sent it. Just try it. If you like it, you keep it, then you can buy it, or you send it back. That's a cool story.
Oh, great. Yeah.
And now, when you hear his music, he is making so tasteful, modular beats. This sounds really great, awesome.
I have a question. Don Buchla's system, by the way, the current Buchla systems, they are on the show here, introducing the easel and the 200E system, but the 200E system is already kind of a digital one because it's storable. Am I right? And that's my little bridge to get over to Gerhard Mayrhofer, because he told me when I asked him about the big Moog modular, because Moog was making the first analog modular system in 5 rack space, I don't know when, 60s or so, and they are still existing. He's the biggest collector of those, or he used to be, whatever, I don't mind, or one of those, but they still exist and they still work. And I asked myself on this show and in front of the so-called Bauteilkrise, what's the word for it, the spare part crisis that all manufacturers have, what is going on with, is it good to have a limitation of spare parts, because what just happens in the world, that these spare parts are not available anymore, leads us to, every manufacturer has to increase the prices, because first of all, the automobile industry is taking away all spare parts, and then the gun and weapons industry is taking the rest if they're good enough for them, and then there's nothing left for the synthesizer idiots here sitting, and then they want to build up and this transistor is missing, I can't do it. And that happens all the time. So I thought it's perhaps bad for my shop, but it's good for the world because it's increasing at the same time the respect against the stuff that is already existing, because there is already 4 oscillators in the basement or below the table or whatever in every other second studio, and then they buy the 5th one because they have the impression that this would help to get it even better. And as we all agree, that is not true. And Moog systems still exist from 1960, 60 years ago, 50 years ago. Okay, they are really old, and if I see all these components now, and if I look onto these very tiny things, I thought, will this survive in even 3 years or 5 years, How far is this going? And Gerhard was telling me then, he's the one getting over these new-made Moog modular things to make them work for the European clients if something is wrong. And perhaps you can give us a little insight about what's the difference between the old stuff and the new stuff.
Well, there's probably a very long story. What's the difference between the old stuff and the new stuff? I'm in love with the old stuff. But sometimes I get the impression that it's kind of a religious discussion between analog and digital.
Where we were.
I consider myself a tool maker, like Bob Moog was saying. He's a tool maker, and he makes tools for musicians. But I also believe if you sit in front of a Moog system, like a 3P, for instance, it will force you to a different music compared to a Eurorack system. Because I think the man-machine interface matters a lot. The way you use the machine, the way you touch the machine. And also if you look at Moog modules, for instance, there is sometimes I get questions from customers, why don't you build in an attenuator in front of the filter? I said, because Bob Moog decided not to do it, and I'm doing it exactly like he was doing it. And there's a certain reason for that, because a filter is a filter, and a filter is not an attenuator, you know. There is a special attenuator module. So it's, if you look at such a 5U modular system, you see the sound flow. You understand immediately how it works. And I think this is really impacting the situation. But, I mean, I can only talk about the sound source, how to generate the sound, and all the modules we are building, and you know, we are building the old Moog modules, are strictly analog. But is the sound still analog if I'm using the new fantastic digital delay from Gert, or is it now digital? So therefore I'm saying it basically, from my point of view, it really doesn't matter. Because, you know, the musician or the composer or the producer, needs to decide what's the sound I want, you know, what's the quality of sound, and it can be a mixture between digital and analog easily, you know. For instance, if our version of the Moog 3P does have a link to Eurorec systems, because for me it was simply too much of a religion to separate both worlds. I think it's much better to integrate both worlds and work with both worlds. There are a lot of very good, excellent digital synthesizers, and there are excellent analog synthesizers. We are just building analog synthesizers. Nothing digital is involved, so I'm on the safe side here. But I think it's the decision from the musician.
But, so we all agree in general it's not about analog and digital, so we can skip that discussion. It's about quality of tools, and build quality is the aspect to look on, and in the end the inspiration that we get from the single unit. But in the end every single unit has an inspiration because it's inspired by one like you or one like you making things for themselves. No?
I think from my point of view what matters a lot, components matters a lot. What components you are using.
This is a quality thing?
This, from my point of view, it's a quality thing.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it's if I look at modern produced modules or synthesizers or whatever, so it's made by robots, more or less. So the components are made to be used by robots.
The components.
The components, yeah. And then
there's no alternative.
No, the point is, I think it's like I remember times when I went to a scrapyard of old cars. It was like the Volkswagen or something like that. You went to that scrapyard and you could get whatever you need to repair your own car. I think it's the similar with the old, not old, like the Moog or Synth-Werk, and most of our modules. It's still quote standard components, so not the posh stuff of tomorrow.
Yeah.
So I believe that even if the chip crisis is getting worse, you will still get components you can use.
From the crack?
Sort of, yes. Or you still have now companies who have specialized, like with old cars, who are specialized on producing old components. So with the methods, the machinery that have been used earlier. If you look at very modern modules or consumer equipment like phones or something like that, because it's assembled by robots, there is no information on the value of that component on that component anymore. So you can't see anymore, well, is this a certain value or larger, or schematics, anyhow you don't have about that. And so I think it's more, if this one is getting sick, quote, or dies or whatever, you can just throw it somewhere. If you take the more, well, not so more commonly using common technologies of the 10 years ago, you can still repair them. And there are companies now who even create the old chips used in the Oberheims or sequential circuits of the 80s. so you can use those again, and they even are pretty good to say, okay, yeah, we know that you have these funny people who have still through-hole technology. So they have a chip they want to put in an old Oberheim. Okay, we produce that one in that format, but for the new guys who say, well, no, we want to have surface mount, they produce it in both formats. So you have spare parts for the old stuff, and you can use it even with modern technologies. And I think that's, but I guess it will get more and more complicated to repair those things. And for a mobile phone, after 2-3 years, you say, okay, guys,
yeah. And that's bad.
Yeah,
that's
sure.
Really horrible.
Sure.
But there's another aspect. I mean, I agree with what you said about it doesn't matter. That's what I meant when I said hybrid earlier. I think most of us just work hybrid. We use all kinds of tools, and tape's awesome, and the violin is an awesome thing, and 808's a fantastic thing, and you know, a digital module in a Eurorack can be awesome too. One of the things, okay, made by robots, I get it, a lot of the modern, in fact that's one of Intelligel's sales lines, right? Made by intelligent robots in Canada, I think Intelligel said. So they're proud of it. One of the things that got me into, I didn't have the money to get involved in the vintage world. I mean, I decided not to spend my money on the vintage synths, put it like that. So, because it just freaked me out. Not only, I get it that they're an investment, some of the vintage synths. I know you guys aren't talking about vintage necessarily, but when I got into Eurorack, the vintage stuff was very expensive. And not only was it very expensive, it was very expensive to repair. Not for you guys, because you guys know how to do it. I didn't know how to do it. So if my System 100M went down, yes, I had to find some genius mechanic in London or somewhere in Europe and send it to them. And one of the huge things for me about the Eurorack format was that it is relatively affordable. I'm not saying it's cheap, but it's relatively affordable, and that's partly because it's made by robots. So it's a kind of a two-edged sword, you would say. I say in it, you know, it's pluses and minuses on both sides. There's Eurorack clearly boomed. You know, Dieter Döpfer's a genius. He's hit the spot somehow, like the MIDI guys did back in the day. Somehow he hit a spot, and it just boomed. And all the makers came in, all the little boutique makers, and all that's possible, I think, because of the robots. Because it's pitched at a price point that is acceptable to a lot of us, you know.
Yes.
I'm not knocking what you, I'm not knocking the big. I love the point to point.
What I think it's again, it's a decision a little bit. It's probably, I'm not sure whether it's arrogant, but it's probably a decision whom you want to use to produce what you are doing. Yeah. So I think if I look at Europe, so the like Germany or Austria or Poland, you still have small companies from the old days, who produce printed circuit board like in the old days, and who have sources for components like in the old days. You can decide whether you use a module that is built like in the old days, because you are still the companies doing that. If you say, okay, this is restricted to a certain volume, so if you want to sell 10,000 of it, that's probably not working anymore. Yeah. But we in Europe have still this opportunity. If you look into the, at least my impression or what I see, if you send everything to China for production, it's way cheaper than if you do it in Europe.
Yeah, but this is tasteless.
I'm just saying to draw the picture.
Yeah.
Behringer forever.
What? Who?
And
who you meant?
And what the consequence is a little bit when I talk to people in the US, they say, why can't you? Not why. You are producing still not very large amount of batches for modules. How can you do that? Yeah, a small company, mine is in Bavaria, for example, in the Bavarian woods. Even first.
That's you.
No, it's not him. No. But if we in the US, we don't have those anymore.
Yeah.
I know that Dave Smith, so for sequential, that they pretty much do a lot still in the US, but you don't have it anymore. We in Europe, I think, are pretty lucky to still have small companies producing small amounts of modules or front panels or whatever.
And we should keep that alive.
Exactly.
But what I said with components matter. For instance, our philosophy is everything needs to be built by hand, you know. The human interaction is important.
Sorry, go on.
And so we select a lot of components, you know. We treat the components with respect. We don't throw them around. We're using wires. We're using the old Moog frame, so we did it exactly, and therefore our claim is the spirit of Trumansburg, because we want to do it like the first factory in Trumansburg. This is our philosophy. I mean, this is just how we are thinking. I'm not saying that this is good or bad or whatever, this is just the way we are doing, and we think that therefore it sounds a bit different. And I'm not saying it's better or Joerg is better or it's not as good as or however. It's just a different way of creating an instrument.
I think that's wonderful. And I had the experience of, Spiritual Friendship got invited to a week in the Moog Sound Space in Asheville, and it's above the factory where they're making the old modules, hand-wired. And that was profound for us. We would turn up in the morning, walk through the benches where there were like 6 people assembling the modules, go upstairs and use vintage and the very same modules that they were working downstairs, and the interface and the sound and the love in the module totally affected the records that we made whilst we were there in that time.
Yes,
it was a miraculous experience, because we had no idea we were going to be walking through the workshop. The people in the workshop, the men and women working in the workshop, could hear, because we had the PA on quite loud, they could hear what we were doing all day. And we could, when we took a coffee break, we went downstairs and said hello and shared some love with the makers. That was amazing. It was amazing.
Bob Moog said one interesting sentence. He said, if I remember correct, I don't want to talk about a spiritual relationship, but I think there is a consciousness between the musician and the components of the instrument. And for me, this has a huge meaning.
I'm sure that any violinist or acoustic guitarist would feel exactly the same way. The strings, the wood, it all counts, right?
Yes. Wonderful. It was a wonderful conversation, gentlemen. I think that was interesting for everybody. I hope. And that was a call.
Yes, this was day number 3. Really great. It's becoming dark now. It's really late now, and yes, it was a good day. I was a little bit tired. I presented a little bit less synthesizer this time, but we had many good concerts today, and it was really a joy to listen to them. And yes, tomorrow, unbelievable, is the last day. And yes, then the whole show will be over. Yes, there are still many companies to visit. Not everything will happen. We will see. I'm really relaxed about this, and yeah, it's just for having fun here and having a good time, meeting nice people. This is Superbooth 4, and yes, we see us in 14 hours. Goodbye.